live streaming now. Thank you, Maria.
Welcome everyone to our November Cabinet meeting. I'm just going to hand over to Jessica just to go through the online meeting protocols before returning to the meeting proper.
Great, thank you, Mayor Glanville. Okay, I'm just going to read some protocols out for this evening. Please only speak when invited to by the chair. All participating members to keep their camera on during the proceedings unless they are having bandwidth connection issues. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and direct all communications via the chair. Please ensure that your mics are muted when you're not speaking, apart from the chair, who does not need to mute their mic at any stage. If you are referring to a specific page or picture within the report, please refer to the page number. If you are having technical difficulties, please use the chat function in the Google Meet to alert the meeting, or dial in on the phone number using the PIN provided within the invite, or on the Council's website within the meetings page. Please do not use the chat function for putting formal questions to the committee or to make any other comments. Any persistent disruptive behaviour will result in removal from the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And also, I think this is the first time we've held one of these meetings where we have a new Google raise hand function. So I can see that. So if you want to use that to come in as well, that would be great. But as Jessica said, predominantly we've used the chat function for that formal notification in the past. I'm not going to do, as I have done previously, a huge amount of preamble this evening, but I think we all know that it's still an incredibly difficult time for residents, our own staff, and the wider public sector. And I think I've said in other forums that we've returned to seeing local residents dying from COVID. So I think all of us will want to keep the 245 local residents and their families and communities in our thoughts. And as we move into tier 2 during the course of this week, there's a huge amount of challenge still to come, not only if we're going to have a safe Christmas period, but actually continue to fight the virus and keep people safe and keep services moving. But on that note, I will open the meeting formally. I've got apologies from absence from Councillor Williams. Don't think I've got any other. Not seeing it. I will add Councillor Marima's apologies as well, because I know that she's at a meeting elsewhere at this time. Are there any urgent items of business? I haven't been notified of any. No. Declarations of interest. I think inevitably when we come to the school governor report, agenda item 15, nearly all of us will know Howard Palace, who is the governor appointee. I just think we just need to note that. I don't think it prejudices our ability to make that decision because we would all have to leave the room. But that's worth noting. Are there, and is it okay, Dawn, to do that on behalf of everybody, to just recognise? Do you want us to know that it's Councillor Palace's father? It might just be worth saying that, I think, for full transparency.
Note that in a minute.
Thank you. Any other declarations? No. I've not been given any notice of intention to conduct business in private beyond the exempt section of the agenda. So item 5 is to consider any deputations, questions or petitions referred to the Cabinet by the Council's monitoring officer. I hadn't received any by the deadline, but I was notified that Mr. Watson, who, as we know, is a resident of Victoria Ward, had requested to speak, and it was quite early on in the process, so I was very happy to allow Mr. Watson to attend the meeting this evening, and we'll hand over to him for a brief introduction of what he wanted to raise. Mr. Watson. I think you might be muted, Mr. Watson.
Can you hear me now?
Perfectly, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I seem to be a regular on this. It is on a different subject, so I thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the Cabinet this evening. Hackney Council have shown that they're not afraid to make difficult and sometimes unpopular decisions when it comes to controlling the spread of this terrible coronavirus. And what I want to do is to ask you for 5 minutes of your time to bring you to your attention a serious development concerning the pandemic, which I believe could have an impact on the risk of the spread of the virus here in Hackney. And I believe that if we act now, we could prevent further risk of the ongoing infection of the population. I will be brief, but I wanted to give you some background to this. Now, you may have seen recently on television or read in the media or only a couple of days ago on LBC about some important research by Professor Joanna Santini and Professor Sarah Edwards of the Structural Molecular Biology Facility at University College London. It is all about evidence that COVID-19 virus has been detected in the animal population in Denmark. As evidence mounts for the possibility of COVID virus infecting various animals, scientists at UCL here in London say a global effort is needed to reduce the risk of the virus later returning to people. In a comment piece for an esteemed journal, The Lancet Microbe, the researchers write that if the virus becomes common in an animal population that lives near people, there would be a risk that another outbreak could occur, even if the virus is eradicated in people in the area. The report said there is increasing evidence that some animals can catch the virus from people and might subsequently transmit it to other people. So they go on to say that we need to develop surveillance strategies to ensure that we don't get taken by surprise by a large outbreak in animals, which could pose a threat not just to the animal health, but to human health as well. It goes on to say virus transmission in animal populations could become irreversible if left unchecked and may threaten the success of existing public health measures if people continue to catch the virus from an infected population of animals. The authors write that the immense scale of the COVID-19 pandemic compounds the possibility of sufficient animals becoming reservoirs of the virus, which could be more likely than for past epidemics, such as the more contained SARS outbreak in 2002 and 2003. Professor Santini and her co-author, Professor Sarah Edwards, reviewed the evidence from case studies, experiments testing infection in small groups of animals, as well as laboratory and modeling studies describing likely infection mechanisms. Modeling and lab studies suggest that SARS-CoV virus could in theory be transmitted to numerous animals based on findings that the spike protein on the virus attaches to host cells, using a protein that is found in many different species, including foxes. Notably, there have been recent cases in Denmark, Netherlands, South Africa, Switzerland, Russia, and the USA of farmed mink becoming infected. The discovery of COVID-19 mink variant in humans led Denmark, the world's largest mink fur producer, to launch a nationwide cull earlier this month. Professor Santini comments that only time will tell to exclude the possibility of other animals being infected, and this example highlights not only the risk to human health, but also animal welfare concerns as the possibility of other species spreading the virus to humans. The professor went on to say that there's an urgent need for widespread surveillance by testing samples from large numbers of animals, particularly pets, livestock, and wildlife that are in close proximity to human populations. We need more information at the same time as taking simple precautionary measures, especially with species who have the potential to spread the virus rapidly in the wild. A robust risk assessment would also require reviewing our ability to manage an outbreak in those animals, namely our ability to isolate, protect, or contain different animals. So, my ask to Hackney Council is to get ahead of the curve and take a lead in preventive action by looking at the risk that the ever increasing population of urban foxes here in London could, in the future, undo all the good work of lockdowns, social distancing, and other preventive strategies currently employed by Hackney. So be bold, as you have been with other policies, and implement a humane cull of the infestation of foxes in Hackney. The fox population in London is already poses a health risk with their fouling of streets, pavements, and private property, laden faeces. Hackney has laws it imposes on dog owners, which is there to protect the public health of our citizens. So I ask you, Mr. Mayor, and councillors who represent us, not to stand by and ignore this risk posed by our out-of-control fox population. It should be your duty to act now. So finally, excuse the pun, but let's kill two birds with one stone. Protect us against further spread of COVID and control the outer spiraling spread of foxes in our area. So thank you for listening to me. I'd be interested to see what your views are of this rather worrying outbreak in animals in some other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. I think firstly, we will want to take on board what you've said and write back to you with a more formal response. There's a lot to take in there, both in terms of the scientific study, but also some of the conclusions that then come from that. I didn't quite expect to end up where you left us in terms of a fox cull in the borough. I do know that the issue of fox is obviously something that's well known to many of us here in the cabinet. And many of us have been, have dealt with casework around foxes and some of the more infamous cases locally. I think one of the pieces of reflection I would have, obviously, around what's happened in Denmark is there is also the animal welfare response and concerns about whether or not epidemiologically it's the right decision, but also the impact on the animals themselves. I note that you did say humanely. I think also there's a challenge around, whose responsibility to do such a thing, if it was evidence, would be, and whether that would actually rest with the council or somebody else in government. I do know that in terms of foxes, it isn't our role in the system to deal with them, except under very exceptional circumstances. I think the most important thing we're obviously focused on is making sure that we act on an evidence basis. So I know that Public Health colleagues did receive the outline of what you were going to speak of this evening, but want to take that away, as I said, and reflect on it. So that is probably the best I can do tonight. And then we will come back to you in writing and ensure that that is also written into the minutes of a future cabinet meeting, so that it's available publicly as well, given you've raised those concerns publicly. I don't know if Councillor Kennedy wanted to add any more to my response, or if that's okay for now. Thank you. I do also think that surveillance is obviously the most important thing around this, whether we're talking about human or animal populations. It looked like, Mr. Watson, you wanted to come back.
Yes, really just to thank you for that. I do understand that it may not be responsibility of the council, but we're all responsible to control this pandemic. And if it is not your responsibility, then you could lobby for some sort of understanding on whose responsibility it is. Sometimes when people deny responsibility, it can fall through the cracks. So I would ask you to do that, and I thank you for bringing this to the attention of the public health people as well within the council. I do have some other articles from The Guardian and from some other journals that I have found about it. If you want me to share that, some of them might be alarmist, some of them might be very, very valid. But I think it is wise to look at it because I believe it could undo a lot of the good that's been done with some of the policies of the council. And I know I personally feel that there is an epidemic of foxes in the borough, and but they're not treated as they're not categorised as vermin, so environmental health can't do much about them. But they're spreading and spreading and spreading. So thank you very much anyway. And if you do want me to send any further information, Jessica's got my email, so perhaps she could reach out to me.
Thank you. And please do provide it through Jessica, and then we will make sure that public health colleagues. And one of my immediate thoughts was seeing what the government thought around this and responsibilities as part of our response. So I will definitely do that, Mr. Watson. I'm also concerned as well that we don't conflate our concerns about foxes and this, because there are obviously other animals that live amongst us. That I would be concerned if euthanizing was the only public health response, that could lead to further sort of disquiet. But as I say, we'll come back to you in writing. Thank you, Mr. Watson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Item 6 is the unrestricted minutes of the Cabinet meeting held on the 19th of October. Are we happy to agree those minutes?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Great. The unrestricted meetings of the Cabinet procurement meeting held on the 7th of September as well as the 5th of October. I think Deputy Mayor Renison, they might
just as set out.
Are we happy to agree them?
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. We obviously note the wonderful progress of CPC and the amazing work that it's doing. I think we're then back to you, Deputy Mayor Renison, for item 8, which is the OFP.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. The now much more widely read OFP, perhaps, than some time back. So there have been two key developments since the last overall financial position presented to Cabinet. The first is Croydon's issuing of a Section 114 notice. This report seeks to reassure members as to the robust financial procedures we have in place here in Hackney, of which the OFP forms a part, and also sets out the very different year-end position we face as a borough in contrast to that which Croydon were forecasting. The second is the government spending review. This starts to provide some clarity for the next financial year, although we're still awaiting details of local government funding, and it's only right to reiterate our concerns that initial savings proposals are centred on increasing the potential taxation burden on local government and freezing public sector workers' pay. We will, of course, update members as we have more detailed information. Otherwise, as set out, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Renison. Are there any questions or comments? We're happy to agree the report.
Agreed.
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 Thank you.
Agreed.
The capital update is as set out, and we'll obviously be returning to the really positive plans to invest in new primary care infrastructure through the 2 new GP surgeries that we're co-producing a plan to develop with the local, well, what was the local CCG. There's also good progress in the update around the investment in Dalston. I think we're all familiar with how important Dalston Town Centre is to the borough. It's proved its worth even more during this pandemic in terms of providing high quality, culturally competent, essential services to our residents, whether it's be at Ridley Road or elsewhere in the town centre. So this represents our continued wish to invest in both Ridley Road and Dalston and the surrounds as part of that broader Dalston conversation response. Are there any other questions or comments from members, or are happy to agree the report? Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. So as I signalled, straight coming swiftly afterwards is item 10, which is the primary care capital projects. I will, as I've spoken briefly about it, probably introduce Councillor Kennedy, who's closer to it in the governance board than I am, but obviously a very welcome paper, Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I will briefly sum up. So we have 2 GP surgeries practices in very cramped premises. We have 2 council sites, one at Belfast Road and one at the portico, the Clapton portico, and we're going to build 2 brand new GP surgeries on those sites so that these existing practices that are bursting at the seams can have new healthcare facilities. These over 30 years will be self-funding, so we will fund on our own land the construction costs up front, and then over the course of 30 years the rent received from the surgeries will pay that money back. So self-funding over 30 years. No extra cost to us over the course of those 30 years, but to our residents who desperately need those new healthcare facilities, brand new premises. Apart from that, as set out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kennedy. Clearly there is, given this is a commercial activity of the council, there's an exempt appendices later in the agenda. If obviously colleagues wanted to discuss that now, that would have implications, but I'm assuming that colleagues are content with the paper at this part of the agenda and we're happy to agree it.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Can I thank David and the team for the paper and the progress? I know it's going on to CPC now, but I know it's been an incredibly detailed piece of work, and I know you've dealt with a number of questions, including from me, and I just want to thank you for all of the work that you and the team have done, so thank you. Item 11 is the appointment of the main contractor, Britannia Phase 2A. I'll ask Deputy Mayor Ennison to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. So this is slightly unusual in that it is a procurement report that we are bringing to full cabinet. So I just want to thank officers for all the work they've put into the procurement exercise, and also to indicate to members that if people want to ask more technical questions on the procurement process itself, please feel free to do so. I realise it's a slightly different environment having it at cabinet as opposed to cabinet procurement committee. Just in terms of the report itself, the detail is in the report as set out, but I'd like to draw 3 things briefly to members' attention. The first is to thank Shoreditch Park Primary School. As the report explains, this is a complex site due to falling within the school boundary. And on behalf of both members and officers, I'd like to thank the school leadership team and governors for their advice and guidance through this process. And I know Deputy Mayor Bramble in particular would want to reiterate their thanks. Secondly, none of this negates the need for Section 77 from the Secretary of State. Today's report reflects the conclusion of the procurement process for providers to take forward this site if Section 77 is granted, and the recommendations stress that contract award is contingent on this. And thirdly, this site forms part of the overall Britannia master plan. The new leisure centre and school are now nearing completion and looking fantastic for anyone that finds themselves passing that way. And this brings forward plans for new homes, including 81 genuinely affordable homes for Hackney residents. I'm happy to answer questions if members have any. Otherwise, the recommendations are as set out.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Renison. And just to remind Cabinet that we agreed at the very start of the Britannia development process, as Deputy Mayor Renison's indicated, that all major decisions would come to Cabinet to increase the degree of transparency and oversight. And I'm not saying CPC doesn't do that, but this is obviously a slightly higher date in the civic calendar. But I know that CPC also fulfills that function normally.
Keep digging, Mayor Glanville.
Right, well, I dug and then dug myself back out again, which is very similar to this project, dare I say. Are any other questions for Deputy Mayor Renison? We're happy to agree the report.
Agreed.
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 Great, thank you. And just to thank Jane and Chris and everyone in the team for their work with Deputy Mayor Renison and I and Deputy Mayor Bramble. So item 12 is the Air Quality Action Plan. Councillor Burke, can you introduce the report?
When I unmute myself, Chair, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Chair. I believe that Sam Kirk is in the room this evening, and I'll hand over to Sam in just a moment, given the significant amount of work and personal effort she's put into the delivery of what I believe is the finest air quality action plan of any municipality in the country, not least because it contains references to sources of poor air quality which you will not find elsewhere, including the significant contributor that motor vehicles make, not merely from the tailpipe to poor air quality, but through road wear, tyre wear and brake wear. In fact, Chair, in excess of 50% of the particulate matter associated with the operation of motor vehicles in Hackney does not come from the tailpipe at all, and therefore it's imperative that we have an air quality strategy that looks at the various components and contributing factors to poor air quality in Hackney in great detail, and I'm confident that Sam and the team have delivered that. So I'm now going to hand over to Sam Kirk, who will take the Cabinet through the paper in a little bit more detail, but not for too long. And I think it would just be useful for people to obtain a sense of the scope of this document. Sam?
Thank you, Councillor Burke, for that introduction. Yes, I think some of the key things that we've put together in this draft air quality action plan is that we want to set a clear vision for what we want to achieve with improving air quality in Hackney, and also within that to actually set the goals. And a key thing here is that we want to adopt the World Health Organization air quality guidelines for particulate matter 10 and particulate matter 2.5. And that's key. I mean, because there's a lot of things that we can actually do to reduce nitrogen dioxide, but whether that actually reduces particulate matter, and we obviously all know the impacts that that has on health. And especially with what's happened this year with COVID, the links between poor health and air quality are ever more increasing. So we have developed this draft air quality action plan. We have followed the GLA's guidance because we have to follow their guidance with that. But what we've also included is targeting schools and communities, and also adding in a lobbying theme. So we've got 9 themes in total, and each of those have got a number of actions. We've got 42 actions in total. These have been drafted. I can't claim credit just for my team. This has been a council-wide contribution because it affects the parking team, the communications team, public health, the transport team. So all of the actions that we've put into that action plan have been contributed to by all of those teams, and I'd like to thank them for their input because we couldn't have done it without them. The next stages for this is that it's a statutory consultation. So the recommendation is to go out to consultation on the 14th of December for 8 weeks. we will then feed back in the results of that consultation and we'll bring it back to Cabinet for formal approval. I'd also just like to add as well that we have actually, to make it a really good action plan and to make sure that we are following the GLA's guidelines, that we've actually got an external consultant in just to peer review our action plan, and they've contributed some recommendations which have been included. And I am happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you.
I had a hand up, Chair, but I'm happy to go after anybody else.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Otherwise, I'll return to Councillor Burke. I think we've been blown away literally by the level of work that's gone into this, Sam, and just thank you. And obviously that aspiration that Councillor Burke set out at the start is very, very clear in the report. Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd also note, at the risk of embarrassing Sam, that this document has been delivered at exactly the same time that Sam has led the team in the waste service to deliver residual waste restriction, which I think we would all agree, anybody who's been involved in that particular piece of work, is one of the most significant service changes due to be undertaken by this council in the memory of most councillors in Hackney. So Sam and the team ought to be commended for that as well. I think I'd finally just note, Chair, that the London Borough of Hackney has, until very recently, or at least by the latest data that I have access to, has the sixth highest mortality rate from a pollution of 418 local authorities. And a joint study by Queen Mary University, the University of Edinburgh, and King's College recently demonstrated that children in the London Borough of Hackney were growing up with stunted lung development as a result of our poor air quality. So this piece of work, in combination with the many other programmes that we're undertaking as a council to address the scourge of air pollution in this borough, couldn't be more timely, and I therefore commend it to Cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor. Lots of nodding, you'll be pleased to see. Are we happy to agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. I just wanted to note that there was also an exempt appendix to item 11. I didn't reference that in the way that I did with 10. Clearly, there is an opportunity to return to that exempt appendix if Cabinet wishes it to at the end of the meeting, but obviously I should have mentioned that slightly earlier. Item 13 is the Children and Family Service full year report. Deputy Mayor Bramble, do you want to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. And this is the report that is for members for the year 2019-2020, and it is tabled in a series of places, of course, Chair, tonight at Cabinet, but also for Council, Scrutiny Commission, the Children and Young People Safeguarding Board of City and Hackney. So there's an opportunity for it to be seen in its entirety in various places. I want to thank Anne and the team, but especially an officer, Atticus, who has worked on this tirelessly and ensuring that any document that's produced in a public-facing forum is engaging and accessible for a wide variety of audiences, which is so helpful when you're talking about children's social care. Just want to highlight a couple of the challenges that the services faces. We've had the Ofsted visit, and while it highlighted lots of areas of positive practice, Mayor Glanville, they also had a clay framework set out of where we needed to improve. And you and I made a commitment that we would have a public-facing document to let residents understand what that journey looks back too good, too outstanding, and that document as well, again, has had a lot of work go into it by Atticus and other officers, and hopefully gives the community a way in to see what's going on in that area and how we are taking that journey back to all services, and want to commend all staff that are working on this. I would have to say that the pandemic, Meg Glanville, has been a challenge for this service area in particular, but as Hackney does, as we've done across the council, what officers have done is thought about how they work differently, and social workers have thought about how they deliver their care to children and their families in the midst of that. And we found different ways of working, and would say one of the positive things is that children's social care and education are working closely. I will go on to an achievement, Mayor Glanville, because I feel like I'm taking a long time on this, but there's so much to really be proud of. I think what I would take a bit of moment to say, it's a demonstration of where things have not gone well, how we've all stood up together and talked about that journey quite publicly and openly about what that journey looks back going forward. One of the positive things, and I end on this, is that 65% of our care leavers are in education, employment and training, and we are the highest in the country for that, Mayor Glanville, in 2019 and 2020. You know how we are proud of Hackney, and our looked after children are 5th in the country for our GCSE results, and we know that looks a bit different given what's happened with COVID, but absolutely let's end on a note of celebration and commending our children and young people. Thank you for your time, Chair, or me giving the report.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. I just wanted to obviously note that since the report was produced, Sarah Wright, who is the Director of Children's Services, has obviously left the council, and just to take this opportunity at Cabinet to pay tribute to her work, and not just in this report, but at her time of leading the service. I also know that some of you got to attend Anne Sego's retirement celebration this morning. The Family Information Services referenced obviously in the report is a remarkable woman who I've not met and couldn't attend this morning, but has served the council for 50 years and is also a Hackney resident. And I think it's absolutely right that Cabinet note to her service, and it just shows just how the contribution of so many to keeping our children safe, but also ensuring, as Deputy Mayor Bramble's indicated, that they get the best possible start in life across the broader service. And this obviously captures that broader service as well as that safeguarding role that is so incredibly important as corporate parents. Did anyone else have any comments or questions on the report? Are we happy to know? I presume it's coming. Was that a hand, Councillor Woodley? I'm happy. Come in.
Yeah, it was lovely actually to say congratulations to Anne this morning. There was a lovely potted history of Hackney as part of her presentation, as part of her farewell, which was very educational for me. I can't resist, although we must thank all staff, but because the direct relationship I had, in particular over the kind of the first lockdown and the course of the pandemic, was with the Disabled Children's Service. I can't resist an opportunity to sort of thank them for the work they did and the flexibility they showed. I know we've seen sort of national reports about how isolated and often forgotten families with disabled children felt through the course of the pandemic, but there was such a huge effort to maintain contact and to show flexibility with short breaks programs. I can't thank them enough.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley. I'm presuming this is heading towards January full council. Is that right?
That's correct, Mayor Glanville.
Good. Okay, so we'll have the opportunity to see it again there, and just thank everyone for the work that's been put in. I presume, John, this is, sorry, Councillor Burt, that's a legacy hand from the previous item. Just to double check.
Yes.
I can't actually take it down either. So.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I thought it expired of its own accord.
There are versions of the system it does expire, but this is not one of them, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Councillor Maxwell takes a very dim view of my technical capabilities as regards Hangouts, and I can see her smiling in the background. I've learned my lesson, Chair.
Thank you. We're happy to agree with the report.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Item 14 is general exception report around our planning statement of community involvement. It's an amendment to that Councillor Nicholson obviously is going to introduce, but I just wanted to pay tribute to all parts of the council that are leading the response to the cyber attack that took place 2 months ago. It's had a huge impact obviously on our services, our staff, and also the resilience of the organisation, but we've seen sterling effort from across the council to rise to that challenge, and obviously focused on the services that impact the most vulnerable in the borough, but also those regulatory functions that quite rightly we're responsible for. So, Councillor Nicholson, I'll hand over to you on this particular area of that work.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for putting this into a context, because this sophisticated criminal cyber attack has indeed kind of affected the planning service, as indeed, as you say, it has gone and impacted on other services that the council provides for residents. What I would just sort of kind of just emphasise, the urgency that's required for this decision is just to enable the planning authority to maintain a level of sound service for all of those who are making a planning application, and when it comes to determination. So that's the reason for bringing this change forward. It is also kind of I do appreciate that we're talking about consultation and planning applications with this temporary and very urgent kind of sort of response that's required. But there may be concern that this means no one can comment on a planning application at all, either to object or indeed to support an application that may be going through the system as we speak. But this is not the case. What is being asked for this evening is a temporary revision, an adjustment to our Statement of Community Involvement, SCI for short, which guides all of the consultation obligations of the planning service and the way in which it connects with residents. This is about a post-determination notification. And in other words, all normal exchanges can take place if you wish to object to a planning application in the run-up to determination. It is what happens after determination at the planning committee has been arrived at, and it is the notification of that decision that is being asked to be suspended on a temporary basis. This will obviously be being kept under continual review. As the recovery phase to this criminal cyber attack unfolds, Chair, then that review process will obviously kick in. And as soon as this can be removed, this temporary adjustment, then we'll be back at Cabinet to do exactly that, Chair. So with that, hopefully brief explanation, perhaps we can sort of just move forward and I commend the report to Cabinet. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Nicholson. I'm taking from that the final part of your remark that this would come back to Cabinet to return to the previous status quo. Would we be able to, obviously Cabinet meetings are once a month, there can be gaps. Would we return to any of that pre it coming back to Cabinet, or does it have to come back to Cabinet formally to restore that degree of community involvement?
My understanding is that the decision would need to be reversed through the formal due process, Chair, and on that basis, it would need to come back to Cabinet for that change to occur. Unfortunately, at this moment in time, no one in the Council is able to anticipate or predict when that might be. So I think rather than sort of building up expectations now, it's probably wise not to. What I would just add, Chair, if I may, is that this is a requirement that the government do not require the planning service to actually fulfill. It goes well beyond what government require of the planning consultation mechanisms that are in place currently. This is something that as a council and as an administration, we believe very strongly that we go the extra mile when it comes to planning consultation and engagement with residents. And so in this regard, what we are looking at is additionality in terms of consultation that we are asking for the temporary removal of. That's a little consolation, I think, for the seriousness of what it is that has led us to this sort of situation. But the intention is to bring it and reinstate as swiftly as possible. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. That was really helpful, Councillor Nicholson, and I think it shows that it's with anger and sorrow we're making these changes rather than wanting to step back from beyond best practice, which is what we do normally. Are we happy to agree these changes in that sentiment?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Well, we
Agreed.
look forward to it coming back as quickly as it can to return that service to normality, and just thank the officers from across the planning service. I know Carol's here tonight, but also Natalie and the team, as well as the digital services that are supporting their work. Thank you. Deputy Mayor Bramble, item 15, school governor appointments.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. I think that we always appreciate all the work that governors do, but especially in light of the pandemic, where schools have had to work in very different ways to keep their children safe, in contact with their families, and keep children in education. So welcome this appointment. As you mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we all know Mr. Palace in terms of our roles as elected members, as he is Councillor Panis' father, and I'm sure he will be he'll do very well in the role, but just wanting to note that the report and ask members to agree.
Thank you. We're happy to agree the appointment.
Agreed.
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 Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other appointments to outside bodies, no other unrestricted business that I might decide to be urgent. I sometimes wonder what that might be, given I say that every month, but there is none. I think this is a new item, or it might not be. It's just to note the date of future meetings. Our next cabinet meeting is on the 14th of December, taking into account obviously the multiple holiday period, so that's a bit sooner than it normally would be, and then we return to the usual pattern. If colleagues did want to discuss either of the exec appendix, I would be excluding the press and public, but no one has said that they want to discuss them in detail, so I won't be doing that. And all that I have to do is wish you a good evening and thank you for your attendance. Obviously tomorrow is World AIDS Day, so I'm wearing my ribbon, and obviously the end at 1 minute past midnight the following morning of our current lockdown restrictions. But obviously tier 2 is incredibly important, as is adherence to guidance as we move into the rest of the week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.